What if I told you that by December 31st, the tiny bag sitting quietly in your wallet, just 1,000 XRP, could end up being one of the most important decisions you've ever made in crypto, not because of hype or empty predictions, but because of a series of rapidly converging events that the mainstream financial world is only now beginning to understand, creating a window that may not reopen once 2025 closes and the global liquidity reset accelerates into 2026. Welcome back to the XRP Insider Network, the place where we decode the hidden signals, the insider movements, and the real-world infrastructure changes others completely miss. So make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a moment of this unfolding transformation. And as always, nothing in this video is financial advice, just deep dive research and speculative analysis designed to keep you ahead of the herd. Now, let's get into what 1,000 XRP could realistically, strategically, and dramatically become by December 31st, because the story is not just about price, it's about positioning, timing, and the massive, under-the-surface realignment happening right now in banking rails, liquidity corridors, and institutional settlement frameworks that are pointing towards something much larger than any short-term chart movement, something that could turn a modest position of 1,000 XRP into a financial lever with exponentially greater impact as the year closes. Right now, most retail investors are staring at the daily charts, debating cents and resistance lines, while they're completely missing the macro triggers that matter. The consolidation of cross-border payment networks, the shift of international banks toward ISO 2022 messaging, the aggressive digitization of central bank balance sheets, and the increasing adoption of ODL pathways in regions that used to resist blockchain innovation. And here's where things get interesting. When you break down the path of XRP between now and December 31st, you get three distinct scenarios: conservative, aggressive, and catalytic, each carrying different implications for what 1,000 XRP could mean by the end of the year, and each connected to real signals that are emerging faster than most anticipate, especially as liquidity providers quietly increase their footprint in corridors that were basically off the map 18 months ago. Let's start with the conservative scenario, the one most analysts reluctantly agree is possible even without any major catalyst. XRP stabilizing into the 0.90 to 1.40 range by year-end, simply off increased utility volume, gradual regulatory clarity hardening in multiple jurisdictions, and stronger institutional integration. Nothing flashy, nothing explosive, but enough to move 1,000 XRP into a modest $1,000 to $1,400 position, which might seem small, but keep listening, because the real story isn't the number. It's what that number represents when major liquidity corridors begin unlocking. In this scenario, 1,000 XRP is not a moonshot. It's a ticket of entry, a foothold before the door closes and price becomes inaccessible to latecomers, a setup for 2025 rather than the final payoff. But the aggressive scenario, this is where things start to bend, where speculative energy meets real institutional adoption and the market begins pricing in future settlement dominance rather than current volume. In this case, XRP landing between $3 and $7 by December 31st becomes not just feasible, but strategically aligned with the global liquidity cycle. Because these numbers don't require a complete overhaul of global finance, just confirmation of the trajectory already in motion. Suddenly, 1,000 XRP becomes a $3,000 to $7,000 position, meaning a small, humble bag transforms into something that actually moves the needle in a personal financial strategy, something that allows for restructuring debt, accelerating savings goals, building initial passive income engines, or even reallocating into other digital assets while maintaining your XRP core. This is the version of December 31st, where early adopters begin to separate from spectators. But then we get to the catalytic scenario, the one that's speculative, Yes, but not fantasy. The one that becomes possible only if a specific set of high-impact triggers activate in sequence. Triggers that include resolution of major regulatory bottlenecks, entry of Tier 1 banks into ODL corridors, liquidity volume surging from enterprise adoption, or a major global financial recalibration event that forces institutions to seek faster, cheaper, more compliant settlement rails. Under catalytic conditions, XRP could theoretically enter the $10 to $25 range by year-end, not as a new normal, but as a repricing event, a sudden and irreversible re-evaluation of XRP's role in global liquidity plumbing. And in that scenario, 1,000 XRP becomes $10,000 to $25,000, a number that for many people represents paying off a vehicle, escaping high-interest debt, funding a business idea, or finally building a meaningful emergency cushion. Before we continue, hit the like button if you appreciate deep dive analysis that cuts through the noise, because this next part is where most investors begin to rethink everything they assumed about year-end potential, because XRP's performance by December 31st is not strictly tied to charts, it's tied to activation timing, and that timing is compressing, not expanding. And what almost nobody is talking about is the fourth scenario, the structural inflection scenario, where XRP doesn't need a blow-off top or massive speculative mania to significantly change the value of your 1,000 XRP. Instead, the change comes from shifts in liquidity architecture, where XRP becomes embedded as a default settlement asset in certain corridors, whether retail investors notice or not. And this shift creates a floor that the asset simply cannot return below, creating an entirely new baseline valuation. Suddenly, 1,000 XRP becomes an asset with leverage in a world where global money is speeding up, not down, where settlement needs to happen instantly, not over days, where cost efficiency becomes survival rather than convenience. The bag becomes not just a speculative hold, but a position in the infrastructure of a future financial system that is already being built under our feet. And here is where the question gains a deeper layer. What 1,000 XRP could do by December 31st is not only about price, it's about positioning you for what happens after December 31st, when the real financial reshuffling accelerates. Because once we shift from price speculation into structural implications, the question becomes far more interesting. If XRP proves itself as the ideal bridge asset for high-speed, low-cost, regulated liquidity flows, then 1,000 XRP is not measured by dollars. It's measured by influence in an evolving financial environment, and this is where the conversation expands into 2025 and beyond. But staying anchored to the December 31st window, let's walk deeper into what that could look like on a practical, real-life level. Because people aren't holding XRP just for fun. They're holding it because they believe the future financial system will reward early positioning. And if even a moderate scenario plays out, 1,000 XRP becomes a tool that allows you to make decisions you couldn't make today. Consolidating debt, shifting career paths, funding education, or simply establishing a protective financial cushion in a world where economic uncertainty is rapidly becoming the norm rather than the exception. But the catalytic scenario is where the potential becomes transformational, because XRP is one of the very few digital assets with real-world institutional integration, regulatory endurance, and a technical design intended for high-volume settlement, not speculative trading. And if global liquidity fractures further, if cross-border transfers tighten, if financial rails modernize faster due to geopolitical stress, then assets like XRP don't merely go up, they reprioritize within the system. In such a scenario, the December 31st price is not a peak, it's a signal, a revaluation preview, and 1,000 XRP becomes not a passive hold, but a lever of opportunity in a world undergoing rapid financial rewiring. Now, does that mean XRP is guaranteed to explode by year-end? Absolutely not. This entire discussion is speculative and based on observable patterns, not promises, but the convergence of enterprise adoption, legal clarity, banking integration, ISO 2022 alignment, and global liquidity restructuring forms a unique environment where year-end outcomes for XRP could deviate dramatically from historical norms, especially if institutions accelerate testing phases or activate long-planned corridors in Q4. So let's attach meaning to each potential outcome. If XRP reaches $1 to $2 by December 31st, your 1,000 XRP is a foothold. If it reaches $3 to $7, it becomes a meaningful financial asset. If it reaches $10 to $25, it becomes a tool that alters your financial direction. And if a black swan catalyst pushes XRP into a major revaluation event, something speculative but not impossible, then 1,000 XRP becomes a generational wealth seed, not because of guaranteed returns, but because of asymmetric upside in a moment of global transition. This is why early positioning matters more than perfect timing, which is why so many long-term holders refuse to let their bags go, and why many institutions are quietly increasing their blockchain exposure while the public argues about chart patterns. To fully appreciate what your 1,000 XRP could do by December 31st, you must understand that markets rarely reward the loud, the obvious, or the crowd. They reward the prepared. And as we inch closer to the final days of the year, the signals are becoming harder to ignore. Increasing corridor activation, rising institutional liquidity, global settlement networks modernizing at unprecedented speed, and regulatory clarity unfolding step by step, all pointing toward a landscape where assets like XRP may not remain affordable for long. So if you're holding 1,000 XRP, the real question isn't how much could it be worth by December 31st? It's what position will it put you in when the world finally recognizes what's been building for a decade. If you're still here, you're part of the 1% paying attention. And before we close out, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me how long you've been holding XRP and what you think the December 31st price could be, because the community insights are often just as revealing as the market signals. As always, this is not financial advice, just deep research, analysis, and speculation designed to help you think ahead in a world changing faster than most people realize.